Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith, episode 144. In a second, I'm going to call Andres Barbosa. He's home in Colombia, visiting his parents. Many people have asked us to talk about different topics, so we're going to talk about sparring and topics related to sparring. But let's get the show on the road. I'll call up Andres. Calling Colombia.
Hello, Steve.
Andres, our fact checker. Thank you for being a guest
How
again.
are you?
Good, thanks. And you?
Hey.
How are things in
Doing
Colombia?
Okay. Pretty nice. I'm here up in the mountains visiting my parents.
Does your mother still love you?
Hopefully at least through Mother's Day.
Yeah, that's great.
But,
I know she loves you.
I saw here that we had a Colombian win the Kentucky Derby yesterday.
All right.
And he's a former tennis player from Key Biscayne, Ramiro Restrepo.
But the horse was American.
I found the horse could probably be American, yes. But I found out this morning, Brian Rosenthal, who has this Florida Tennis the 90s chat, and I've known him for about 9 years, as we joke. But yeah, I saw it today. It was amazing because I think I used to play with his cousin, Alvaro, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not 100% sure if they're related now. But I know him well. Pretty amazing story.
Kentucky Derby. I once read that jockeys are among the fittest athletes. It's a totally anaerobic challenge, where the position they're in and how they have to maintain that position. The Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, I read an article today in the Herald talking about how his background started really young. Basically, I guess it was illegal in South Florida for kids at a certain age to be near the track. And his parents found a way to get them, access nearby. It was a pretty interesting story. But I mean, down here in South America, the horse racing is pretty popular. And then if you go down to Argentina, it's like polo is very popular. So it was a pretty amazing story that I saw. I didn't realize it. I didn't watch it yesterday because I'm out of the country, but I thought it was pretty cool.
Oh, Kentucky Derby, that's big time. Sparring. The big time players on the women's side have sparring partners. Let's just go through the term, get going on this topic and topics related to it. It comes from boxing. In tennis, we say shadow swing, with it shadow boxing. That's the first thing in boxing. And the second is to spar. A hitting partner. I have as my notes. I know you sent me notes as well. A practice partner. I think of a practice partner as someone who's not paid. In today's tennis industry, I think a sparring partner is typically paid. Two sides to the story. We have an educational clip that basically states that feeding the ball and sparring does not equal teaching. I think a lot of times the parent is an uneducated consumer, not that all tennis parents fall in that category, but they just think, okay, this is going to be an accelerated process. It's going to be a shortcut for my child to improve at a faster rate, that they hit with someone who's at a higher level. I think back in the day of privates, there was a lot more hitting. Where today, here in the U.S. especially, kids are just programmed out. In other words, you take your private lesson, and then you find hitting partners. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I know my introduction to tennis coaching came in as a hitting partner. I was probably freshman or sophomore in college. And I remember going from tennis practice at FIU and, going off and hitting with guys like Matthias Bulker, Nick Boker, Henry Del Campo, Sean Madden. So I would think that's got to be still the entry position. I guess the biggest issue is, I mean, I was pretty fortunate in the sense that I had some good mentors back then that I was able to kind of learn and observe from. But I would say that today, there's probably isn't that much of a mentor program just because it's pretty easy to just jump in right away, start hitting and making a good living right away. There's probably no incentive to really learn and improve.
With Matthias Bulker, you grew up in South Florida, but he's from Argentina. Is that right?
We used to train together actually when I was still in high school at Kendalltown. And he is like 4 years younger than I am? Yeah, so he's Argentinian, but he was living in Brazil for about 2 years. I guess his dad got transferred out there. And then they came back, I want to say when they were like 16. And they were very close friends with the Del Campos. And we used to play at his house all the time. And then about a year or so later, he finaled at the Easter Bowl. And then basically, I mean, he was always a top junior in Florida.
I think he went to the University of Georgia and won the NCAAs twice, right?
Twice, yeah. And his brother, Nick, was also phenomenal. And just a bunch of great guys. I mean, I see Nick randomly. I shouldn't say randomly. I saw him a few years ago in Miami. I want to say Matthias is working for Apple, but I think Nick is down in Miami.
I think Matthias' career was cut short with injuries, but I remember being at a 15K, played one of our students in a final. It was outdoors in Orlando, it was like 30, 38 degrees. No, I think you're right, 100%, where many, many people start as a sparring partner. But again, the sparring partner, especially in the U.S. right now, they're paid quite a bit of money generally, and then they have a speaking part. But I always tease in boxing that the sparring partner, they wear a helmet and a mouth guard and they don't say anything, so it's the coach on the sidelines. I saw in your notes here, I just read it. Ideally, in my opinion, parents would do the study and absorb all the information and then work with a sparring partner. That certainly could be very, very cost effective, especially if the parents had the time to study the content. I think another thing too is the parents need to have a sit down with their child and go, hey, this is how the world works. It's so expensive. And, we take no complaints from a player, who doesn't want to be coached by their parents. Again, it's not ideal, but the reality of it is tennis has become so expensive.
Well, I mean, the one that came to my mind is Maria Sakkari. My apologies if I mispronounced her name, but I know her mother was a top professional in the 80s, 90s, and I believe that Tom Hill, her coach now, but I'm pretty sure he came in as a hitting partner right as soon as he finished playing in college. So it makes me wonder if the mom was kind of like leading the coaching aspect per se, and then having Tom do the hitting. But that does seem to me to be the model that would make the most sense. I mean, I'm sure Serena and Venus, when they were I guess Serena was using Sasha Beijing. I'm sure back then, Richard was still, or Orison were still calling the shots behind, or maybe even at that stage it was beginning to be Patrick, but it does make sense, I guess, to have two separate roles, and having a hitting partner that is more than capable to match strokes with while still learning the craft of coaching.
Actually, Stevie Longley, going way, way back, I think it was for 3 years, he hit with the Williams sisters every day. I know Brad Thyroff, very good tennis player from Rochester, New York. He was a hitting partner for, I believe, both the Williams girls. Definitely one of them.
Yeah, but you could take it a step further in South Florida, where you had Camila Giorgi's father, who must have run through countless hitting partners with promises of future riches on the pro tour. But again, it'd be the same thing. The father would be there. He'd be the coach, and he would instruct the hitting partner what to do. And similar with the Osakas. I mean, it was, they both have infamous stories down in South Florida with anybody that was a hitting partner in those eras.
With coming back to the Williamses, I know, Jameer Jenkins at one time was the coach or I should say, he was a sparring partner under Patrick Mortogolu. I know Austin Krychek, as a student assistant when he was at Bollettieri's, he would be asked to. He even said it on our podcast. He obviously didn't break too many rules, but if he was late for kitchen duty or something, he would have to be a hitting partner. And I remember he had to hit with Serena more than one time.
Did you have a great story with Austin and Tommy Haas?
Yeah, our listeners can go back to that podcast where you hit the hitting partner, and I guess it pretty much went where Tommy misses the ball, Austin misses the ball, but if Austin misses 2 in a row, he's just bumped. They say sorry, and they bring in another junior. Coming back to just kids going out and just hitting, back to the days when we just had private tennis lessons in America. I think there's a lot to be said for having no feedback. You're just out there practicing. You just go out, you've taken your tennis lessons, very much like how people learn to play the piano. You take your lesson, you take the show me session, show me how to do it, and then they just go out and they get the reps. There's a lot to be said for that expression, figure it out on your own. I think too many times today in the U.S., a coach, I should say a player, they're always with a coach, a sparring partner. They're just very seldom do you just see juniors practicing on their own. And a lot of times that's because of the way the kids are programmed. It's like they don't call people up and play sets because they're in a program. And same thing, we've said it many times on this podcast, where there's not backboards.
Yes. Yeah, I saw that in your notes about, just the ability to go out there and hit and figuring it out on your own and being in your own little world for however long, an hour, 2 hours, without the constant feedback. It reminded me of Wayne Pereira now training Francis Tiafoe. And he just makes the guy go off and do biking sessions for an hour and a half with no phone, no TV, nothing, just him and his thoughts on his own. So
my understanding is that
I think there's definitely something.
My understanding of that is that he can't use his phone pretty much. They work like the NFL 9 to 5, and no phone during that time.
Oh, I didn't know it was that extensive, but
how do you pronounce? He's now working as a coach, but he was a sparring partner. Beijing Sasha, is that right?
Yeah, Sasha Beijing, as far as I know.
Anyway, it was for a week where Serena practiced at our place when I was in Tampa for 15 years, and she was there because she's selling jewelry on the shopping network that was based out of Tampa. And one thing that parents need to realize, it's not just because a sparring partner can hit a hard ball. Is what he can do is he used to be able to copy the playing styles of the women that she was playing against. Very seldom, I think, going back to say a Steffi Graf, the players that played against her said they really had a tough time playing against her underspin backhand because you very seldom see that. You see a woman who's hitting an underspin backhand, even a man for that much, has become kind of a lost art. But to play somebody who's going to loop the ball, cut the ball, it's kind of like going back to how Mr. Hopman or Robert Lansdorp would feed tennis balls. But to be able to do that, not off a feed, but be able to do that with a live ball coming back and forth. I do think that if you look at the backstory of top players, it's like they've had a built-in hitting partner. Last week, Riccardo Acioli talking about, he was 12 years old and he had to start hitting drop shots to beat his mom. But, parents or siblings, they just go out and just rally. The kids are so young. I think this is also a plus too. When a kid starts at a really young age, they don't necessarily have to be in tournaments at all, but they're hitting balls. And the expression that we use is they have no muscles, so they can't muscle the ball. Just very slight of build.
Yeah, I haven't read. I can't remember the name of the book, but I've read a few books ever since I started doing the podcast with you, as far as tennis from the 70s, 60s, and 70s. And it's very funny that in today's world, the hitting partners are typically, let's say in the women's game, are former college players that are transitioning into coaching in the women's tour. But back in the day, it was very common for you to see, let's say, a Pancho Gonzalez mentoring a young Jimmy Connors, or, you know, and in what I would imagine would be a very similar setup to what is currently today the hitting session. So kind of funny how that's kind of been let's say, ushered away a little bit on the pro tour.
What do you mean, having an older coach?
No, just, maybe still in the men's tour, it's still out there where the older pros still kind of mentor the younger guys. I know, you hear a bunch of pros currently that say, how much Djokovic has had an influence, or even a Casper Ruud saying how much Nadal has helped him at the academy just by hitting sessions. I mean, I guess you could also say like Carlos Moya has had a big influence with Rafael Nadal, but it is a little bit, you see it a lot more where I'm not saying that it's a hitting partner per se, but, Moya can still hit a great ball. Right. I remember when Federer and Edberg were coach player. I mean, Edberg, there's video out there of Edberg hitting with Federer. I mean, he still hits a phenomenal ball. So, there's a lot that can be, I'm sure there's a lot that can be taken in when a former great is telling you something and showing you on the court. I think there's a definite wow factor there that applies to players almost no matter what age.
No, for sure. Gerald Donaldson, who is a volunteer coach at UPenn now, he's climbing the ladder quite well on the ATP. Then I believe it was a knee injury, but he had an injury, might have been shoulder, I'm not sure. But he's somebody who had a hitting partner, but that's very rare. I understand what you're saying about, like a Moya with a Nadal, but it's very rare on the men's tour. Donaldson was somebody who had a hitting partner travel with him, but the women, it's almost 100%.
Correct.
Almost 100% they have a sparring partner. To digress, here's a Moya story. Moya is going to play Pat Cash in an exhibition. And Moya comes out, and he gets to be number one in the world. So he comes out and hits a few balls in the warm-up and goes up to the umpire. Again, it's just an XO, and he says, I don't think I'll be able to play. I think I've pulled a groin, and people think it was staged. So the audience is there, and it's 3,000 people or so, and young Nadal comes out, and he plays Pat Cash, who's 35 plus, and Nadal is 15, and Nadal wins.
I've heard that story.
I do think that that's something that takes place in other countries. It doesn't happen so much in the U.S., where young players get a real sense of belonging because they're getting a chance to hang around with older players. But just the rally, that's where you and I've talked about it. I see it's in your notes, it's in my notes. Craig O'Shaughnessy, who has certainly made an impact, which is great, helping people understand the stats, statistical analysis. But, you just hear the first four shots. Taylor Fritz has played so well. Watching him bang balls from the baseline, obviously he grew up with his mother, who was a top 10 player in the world, Kathy May. And but just being able to, keep 100 balls going, rally to 100, see if you can rally 20 over the service line and start again, 20 over the service line. But I do think that too many times people think about, well, what are the pros doing? And when you hear first four shots, or another phrase, serve plus one. One thing that positive for O'Shaughnessy, he's always promoting go to the net. And I don't think people are really welcoming or understanding that message. But I think that one ball mentality, Years ago, there's a tennis camp in France where you'd get a hitting partner. You basically, you shared one ball, so you got a half a ball each. And it's just like, I do think that when a coach rolls out a basket, tennis basket's 300, grocery cart might have 600 balls in it, and the kids can be really sloppy. There's a lot to be said about let's just hit.
Well, that 100 ball example you were mentioning, I mean, the first that I heard of it was with a college teammate of mine that was hitting with Guillermo Vilas. And apparently Vilas would start every practice that there had to be 100 balls hit beyond the service line. If one ball landed short or, God forbid, you missed, you started over. And basically, he must have been doing that from the 70s and 80s. And I remember when Agassi and Brad Gilbert started working together, that was a standard warm-up routine. So that routine has been around and possibly it was around before Vilas, but that was the first one I'd ever heard of it.
I know Vilas used to practice hitting in the wind against two girls. And just,
I think that one.
What's that?
I had not heard that one before.
Yeah. Just the shot tolerance is extremely low. I do think because of the hard courts here in the U.S. or the modern rackets, combination of both, Slap City is, Vandermeer used to say, if your average is 3 and you get 1, you improve to 1, you've improved 33%. Is how many balls can you keep in play?
Slap City could also be caused by, if I don't hit a winner on this particular short ball, I'm not making the volley. So, maybe if there was more faith in making an overhead volley, it wouldn't be Slap City on that particular one. So it's kind of interesting to see what kind of the chicken and the egg, what came first.
Yeah, with Slap City is, young players, they don't get upset when they hit short. And of course, when they hit short, I don't think it's today. The juniors are not playing a combination of approach shot and a volley. They're just looking to hit a home run. I use Chris Clore's line. They're just looking to launch a missile. And it's just red zone to red zone, really unforced error after unforced error. They just, Braden used to always say that people think their forehand is really great because they compare it to their backhand. And it's amazing how many kids run around their backhand from a really, really early age. The shoulder playing the hit, they'll have an extreme grip on the forehand. The ball bounces up high. It's conducive to a high bouncing ball. And not only do they not learn to play the midcourt or the forecourt, but in the backcourt, they're putting themselves way out of position. But just the rally, stand in the middle of the baseline. If the ball goes to the backhand side, hit a backhand. But coming back to just going cross courts, I know you played college tennis, and I think years ago, too many college coaches were not creative, and it seemed to be that everyone was complaining that, our practices, we just go down the line, cross court, down the line.
I saw that in your notes, and it brought back flashbacks because that's 100% what we did. Down the lines, cross courts, and 2-on-1. It seemed like every single day, so...
Yeah, I love the line. I love the line or the thought where, if a kid loves the game, they can go out and hit a half hour cross courts and half hour cross courts the other way. While you mentioned 2-on-1s, I think there was so much respect for Harry Hopman, Mr. Harry Hopman at one time, and so much respect for the Australians that people would do 2-on-1s all the time.
In fairness to our college program, it was tough. We had, let's say, 12 guys, and maybe, I guess we had our coach, Peter, and then Peter Lehman, and then we'd have an assistant. So, and the assistant usually was an ex-player getting his graduate degree. But, you see a lot of the college staffs now, they seem to have at least 3, 4, the staff seems to be at least 3 to 4 deep. I think I saw Tennessee had quite the staff. So, obviously, if you've got 4 people on the staff, and you've got 12 guys, it's a lot easier to get a little bit more one-on-one instruction and not solely be doing down the lines and cross courts.
Yeah, I do think that, well, you mentioned college tennis, cross courts, play some tiebreakers at the end, having practices be more creative. I do think that advanced players, they grow away from doing baskets. Hey, you feed me 10 overheads, I'll feed you 10 overheads. Hit 100 overheads a day, minimum. Coming back to the cross courts, one thing I like to do is take the phone and put it on the tray by the net post and just say, okay, for 20 minutes, we're just going to get cross court forehands. And you don't hear kids say, sorry, they're rallying, sorry, because when you miss, you're wasting the other person's time. And then also, too, you hustle to pick the next ball up. One thing that's gone away is junior players hitting with senior players, the youth versus veteran, even a practice session. But when you get a chance to hit with a better player, we tell the better player, if the player with inferior skills, if they miss, it's the better player's fault. But people have to build up their mindset, their endurance to be able to hit 20 minutes. And see, when you do that, try some of our listeners go out and try that. Kids just think it's forever. You also, I think another thing too is you have to have them take their wristwatch off because they'll start looking at their watch, like, when is this going to be over? I do think people that play indoors, it's quite difficult to say, okay, let's go get a court and hit cross courts. You certainly can do it with 4 people on a court. You do it with 6, and if you miss, you're out. Or you can off to the side of the court. If your ratio is 6-1, you can have skip ropes. You're 70 to 200 square feet. So I do think that it was overused, the cross court drill, but I think now it's, like you said, ushered away. It's something that's not as prevalent as it once was.
Yeah, and it's there is an element of concentration to it. I remember when I was first starting out, I'd watch Rodney Harmon at UM, and he'd have like a 4x4 box in the corner, and having people have to hit 25 total. And maybe he subtracted when they missed or what have you, or maybe you had to start over once you missed. I forgot what it was. And maybe you got, let's say, 5 if you hit a cone. But it was difficult, and it was something where, the coach can feed the ball, but until you make 25, you're on your own. You're on your own trying to problem solve to get to the desired result.
Rodney Harmon, to digress, there's 17 sections of the USTA, correct? 17 sections?
Oh, you got me.
You have to look that up, fact checker.
My fact checking only goes so far.
And so we had 4 students. The USTA each section had a person hired to just travel and do school assemblies. So we had 4 students that held those positions. And anyway, it was in Dallas, and Rodney was hired to lead that program. And I remember attending it. So we had 4 students that were, it was a big deal. It was to work for the USTA and try to promote tennis within your section. Quarterfinals to the U.S. Open. He transferred. I'm not trying to think. I think he transferred to SMU, and Dennis Ralston was the coach.
Yeah, I don't know where. I don't know if he went SMU first and then Tennessee or the other way.
Yeah,
but it was SMU and Tennessee.
Yeah, I think it was SMU was the second move. But wooden rackets, I think that's where to get your parents to go to garage sales, and we talk about that quite often for stroke production. But with hitting, I think of Federer. If all the players tomorrow had to play with wooden racket, Federer would do great, and I think Alcaraz would do great. People that have really solid fundamentals. You go out and you hit with a wooden racket. It will just let you know that that whether you have a long or a short hitting zone. Some other things on my mind.
There's a great clip. I saw a great clip the other day on, I guess Federer and Rublev were out there hitting in Montreal. I'm sorry, in Monte Carlo. with wooden rackets. It's interesting to watch. One guy that I would assume would have been great with a wooden racket is Dimitrov, and one guy in Rublev who I thought would have possibly struggled, and both looked like they were pretty effortless hitting with the wooden frames.
You said Federer, but you meant Dimitrov, right? I saw that. Where did I say
Federer?
Yeah, they did an exhibition.
Poor guy. Yeah, poor guy.
Dimitrov was the little Fed.
He can't escape that nickname. Yes, I meant Dimitrov and Rublev.
Yeah, I saw that. With rhythm hitting, gears with Mannschaft. Tempo is something the coaches used to say in Germany. Tempo, Mannschaft. With just go out and Jim Larry used to do it where you do it to a count of 10. 10 was the highest with intensity level. Gears, first gear, second gear, third gear. People need to learn to be able to hit an off-pace shot. You can do it where they're rallying. It's just arc a ball, drive a ball. You can put the sparring partner, or you could reverse it. And I think this is what happens many times with the older coach. I think of Federer and, say, Tony Roach. The older coach stays in one corner, and obviously they're a world-class tennis player. They're not going to miss. Can alternate spins, but just... And then also, too, to be in a hitting session where it's not a matter where you're trying to win the point. You're just trying to be consistent. Those two words come up all the time. Are you disciplined and are you consistent?
Speaking of Tony Roach, I'm going to make a plea now. If anyone in your network here or the listening audience has a connection to getting Steve to interview Tony Roach, sign me up. Count me in on that one. That's one interview I'd love to hear.
With, I know Andy Brandy. Andy and I work together at All American Sports. Andy's 2 years older than I am. And actually, one summer I met Andy and Joe, and I requested to work with the two of them the following summer. And the following summer, Joe was not there, but I worked under Andy. And I remember Andy, he helped Tony Roach at one point, and Roach sent him a telegram back in the day. It said, it was, "Thanks, Coach," from Roach. But yeah, amazing background. Anybody connected with Australian tennis at that time, the late 50s and on, amazing. Just to think about the number of people he worked with, I think a lot of those things become forgotten. It's like Federer had a very strong Australian influence with Peter Carter than with Tony Roach. And anybody who's connected to Australian tennis from that era, there's going to be a great appreciation for all-court tennis, for doubles, for Davis Cup.
He's totally forgotten because when Lendl and Becker came back as coaches, and everybody was like, "Oh, the super coach! This is a new trend, and this is something that never been seen before." And, Tony Roach, started with Lendl, then went to Rafter, then went to Federer, and then went to Hewitt, and then went to Federer. This guy has seen the best of tennis for 40 years as a coach. Forget as a player that he saw, 20 years of that prior to that as a player. So,
it's like
what a wealth of information.
If people talk to Laver, he talks about getting the opportunity to watch Don Budge win the Grand Slam. There's no doubt about it. When you're around a world-class player, here's something at a much, much lower level. So my son Connor ends up being ranked 2 in juniors in the U.S. Now that doesn't mean that he's necessarily number 2 because some kids are off playing ITFs or even playing for ATP points. So a young kid who went on, he was part of a Division III national championship team, which means he's a really good tennis player. But he grew up playing multiple sports, and throughout high school he played basketball and tennis. And then he found out, okay, I'm 5'9", 5'10", and he pursued playing college tennis. And so he was taught by one of our students. So he was pretty efficient, hit the ball well. So he comes in, and my son Connor just said to him, one teenage boy to another teenage boy, they're the same age. He goes, "Hey, dude, you're just trying to hit the ball too hard." And it's just if just okay, I'm going to keep the ball in play. I'm going to let the other person miss and hit short. But all the way up is that it should be in a junior program where the 18s pull the 16s, the 16s pull the 14s, and all the way down to the caboose. The early childhood development classes, tennis for tots. No, it's very powerful to be around top players, for sure. With the Bryan brothers, I've got that in my notes. Mark Bay pointed this out to me. I'd watched the Bryan brothers practice many times, but Bay met them when they were teenagers, and Mark Bay is a coach out of Chicago. And for years, he would be in the booth at the U.S. Open, the Bryan brothers booth. And they run on the court, and they try to hit 500 balls. And they basically are just doing 3 formats, service line to service line, hitting ground strokes. One comes to the net, hits volleys. The other one comes to the net. So it's one up, one back, and then both are up. And they just try to hit 500 balls in the first 5 minutes. I think that's one thing is just hit. I always tell kids it's like money. The rich get richer because this worked a little bit better years ago, or the bank gave you a little higher interest rate, but you'd put your money in the bank and the bank would pay you. But then people have to, on the flip side, they got to borrow money. The people who can keep the ball in play can keep the ball in play. And that experience level just builds. I think that, that's where when you're out there with a stopwatch is how much time do kids take to pick up balls is that you run. When you make a mistake in the rally with your hitting partner or sparring partner, you say sorry, you run to get the ball. We have people jog backwards because it's better for their legs, for their speed. And then you put the ball back in play. Some things I have down here in my notes for rallying is like exchanging emails, send and receive, especially a few years back with Jose Garris influencing American tennis with his position, director of coaching of the USTA, is send and receive. Send and receive. People playing catch with a baseball. I was never really a baseball player, although I played baseball. Everybody played a little bit when I was a kid. The boys, wasn't fair for the girls. But you could throw and catch. You go to a picnic and your uncle would say, "Hey, you want to play catch?" And if you look at a pro football game, the quarterback on the sideline, they're playing catch. Now, I think very often they have a receiver next to the quarterback, so they're practicing catching the ball, and they're just slowly going through the motion. And they're just warming up their arm, but they're going through the same mechanics. And I think that's very important where when kids rally service line to service line, and with a sparring partner, there's a visual side to it because they get to see their sparring partner hit the ball and how effortless they can be and how easy they make it look. And I think also too, just rallying a ball, besides the reality of it, you've got to be able to keep the ball in play, but people should look at it. Hey, this is fun. It's social. Hey, let's go hit balls up the middle of the court.
You mentioned Mark Bay. I remember him. We used to host the Tennis Plaza Nationals, and in January, it had a bunch of little satellite sites. And Mark Bay would get there 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. And I'll never forget, he said he was there early because he had to do a kick serve recalibration to one of his players. And I used to always love that line. Every time I saw him, I'd mention kick serve recalibration.
Yeah, he's done some TV. I know he's done the TV for Kalamazoo.
He's great. He's great on TV
for a couple of years. He definitely, jockocracy, he definitely can talk tennis. With Jim Lair, I saw an old clip of Jim Lair from our library yesterday where he himself is going through the 16-second cure, what you do in between points. But he would say that for players that are really going to be good, hitting the tennis ball, just the sound, the feel of the ball coming off your racket, that's your drug. That's your fix. And it's a must. You just want to hit balls. And, I think that's where, does the kid want to hit after practice. Hey, you want to rally some more? Let's go hit some more balls. You know, the old adage, do they show up early and stay late? Why don't you comment on, what are your thoughts on the UTR paid hit? You're familiar with that? When that came out?
I've never seen it. I know I've heard you say it numerous times that the first time you heard it, you thought it was a mob hit.
Yeah, the mafia.
But I've never used it. I've never known anybody to use it, so I'm not familiar with how that works.
Well, there's two narratives. I mean, there's always two stories. One positive, and I didn't see a positive when I didn't. This can't be true. First of all, what is the UTR paid hit? It's a service where, say for example, you know, you have a teenage boy who's a 7 and he wants to hit with a 9. Well, you get the phone number of the 9, and then you call them up. I understand they had to be at a certain age. I guess they had to be over the age of 16, and then you could pay them to hit balls. And the positive that I heard was, well, that'd be a great way for the young player who's trying to play the tour to be able to make some money. But yeah, I think it's unfortunate in some ways. There's so many thoughts to this, but we've already said that a parent could study the information and then be in charge of the drills, in charge of the hitting session, and tell their sparring partner what to do. Because, you know, typically someone who hits the ball well, they've played some college tennis, they really are not worthy of a speaking part. Not when they're going to start talking about technique. They're going to wing it. They're going to make it up as they go. But they feel compelled to do that because they're being paid quite a bit of money. And then also too, even the parent wants them to say something. And certainly I think they can when it comes down to, okay, bigger target, got to get there, get set, faster feet, small steps. But are they really going to recognize, you know, problems with the grip, problem with the swing? But I do know that it's kind of the oldest trick in the book. You know, Bollettieri, a lot of positives say about the late Nick Bollettieri. But the backroom deal where they come in and are ushered into a back room, the top juniors with their parents, and they're, you know, this is the deal. You know, you come here and we will give you this, and, you know, getting free room and board, and that's the magnet. They attract other players. But I think tennis is already too expensive. So I do think with a sparring partner, it shouldn't be random where the parents are going to pay somebody just because the person hits the ball really well. There should be more substance than sizzle.
Yeah, I think if I look back on like the last 15 years that I saw, especially in the women on the junior girls circuit, you know, it's very, very prevalent where you have a parent that is handling the duties of coach at a tournament, where, you know, maybe they sit in on every lesson, they hear the information that's being spit out, and they hire a hitting partner, and then they basically are the middle person there to try to relay the information sent from the coach towards the hitting partner, making sure, like, as you say, you take that 1 hour private, you do 10 hours of work, and then you come back later and you've improved since that last private, and you can move on to something else. So I could definitely see the use for that, but I think it's really, really important for the parent to make sure that they are actually understanding what the coach is saying. I think too often, if you're good at coaching, you can make that transfer of information seem to be quite easy, and people think it's easy. It's not as easy as people think. So, I mean, I think sometimes intelligent parents that weren't necessarily tennis players don't do enough of the research to really master that craft where they can understand how to relay it to their kids.
Right. You just said it, transferring information. The way the GreatBase is laid out, it's systematic. It's a structure. It's a blueprint. It's directions. And it's a system of systems. It's a lot of people that haven't done their homework, and they don't realize that the science comes from, say, Vic Braden, or just the progressions from Dennis Vandermeer, and on and on and on. So, in all fairness, many times the parents are not going to become that knowledgeable by just observing lessons. But if there's a reading list and there's videos and say these are the routines. I know when my two boys are very young, I grew up playing ice hockey, and when I was my three older brothers, for example, I've mentioned it, I'm sure, that they didn't go to a figure skating coach. That was just coming into ice hockey when I was a kid and being the youngest, so I was privileged to be taught by figure skaters. It was at a school in Toronto. And now in the NHL, every player, all these years later, every player can fly. It's amazing, the speed, amazing how players can skate. Then I look at pro tennis. Granted, it's improved tremendously in many, many ways. But it's amazing to see world-class players that have such holes in their game. Might say we just start with, say, the backhand volley. But no, if the parents were to really understand the routine, even the child, or peer teaching, I do think the economics of this, the sparring partner academies, for example, could have student assistants. I wouldn't call it a scholarship, but have it be a student assistantship, and have the older players help the younger players. But it is a major, major bonus if the older player can tell the younger player, especially among boys. If a 15-year-old boy is telling a 12-year-old boy, hey, this is what you should do on your forehand. I think everyone's heard that they listen to the teenager, a kid just a couple years older, than they do listening to their teacher, their coach, or their parents.
Well, I'm gonna go backwards here and talk about going back to the GreatBase curriculum. I think this episode in particular is super important for young parents or parents of young kids to get started, because if they were to go through the progressions and improve, I think at the right time, a hitting partner would be very useful, or a sparring partner would be very useful. I think it works a little bit harder. It's a little bit more difficult when you are a teenage player, let's say you're 15, 16, and let's say you have holes in your game. It is very hard for that player to go backwards and make adjustments. Even if it's picking one stroke at a time and making a change, they're less conducive to making the effort to making a change. So why I think this episode should really be geared towards, the parents of kids that are, let's say, from 7 to 11. If it's done right, I think they can really, really develop the careers of their kids in a much more cost-efficient manner.
No, I'm glad you said that. With coming back to the skating train of thought, so I was in Toronto. My kids, I just took them to skate to become athletic, and then they fell in love with hockey, and I said, well, I can make arrangements to teach here, there, or anywhere. So I was in Toronto and studied skating. And Yari Boriski, he's famous now, and he's put so many players in the NHL. But yeah, little kid tennis and little kid hockey, I think all the sports are the same, that if you can't skate, you can't play. And you see these young kids, to me, it's like the squeaky balloon or the fingernails on the blackboard. I see someone hitting the ball poorly. Do I have a crystal ball? No, but to see down the road, it's like, oh no. And that's where, again and again, the winning's confusing. I think we're talking about sparring partner, hitting with all levels. I do think it's a problem that people are always looking to hit with a better player. The young players become tennis snobs. Especially in our program where we have the older players help the younger players, you have to then remind the younger players who grow and the years go by. Now they're the older player. They have to remember, hey, just think about all the people that helped you. Just think about all the older players that helped you along the way. I think that's very important to be able to hit with all levels of players. And it's, I think when people are selecting a sparring partner, are they selecting someone who's, hey, this player is very, very consistent? Miran Mann, who's been a guest on our podcast a couple of times, great guy. Big lefty, big serve, forward on everything. And I can just remember telling him, and he actually, his background, he was Shapovalov's hitting partner when he was a young kid. Took him to tournaments, but his mother would say, just hit high to his one-handed backhand, hit high to his one-handed backhand when he was a little kid, knowing that was a weakness. But I remember telling Miran, you've got to be the worst sparring partner. And he used to just thrive on, I'll show you, and get back on the baseline and just not miss. And because that was not really part of his game style.
What's interesting, you're talking about the playing with a lesser player. You sent me the podcast from Fabio on functional tennis on Mark is it Gillard?
Yeah.
Coaches Magdalene. And, he made a point in there that, while he does use college players, top junior guys to play and practice with Magda on a regular basis, before big events, he's going to have her practice with other women or younger girls that aren't as good, to get used to a, not so hard shot or not so heavy of a shot. And it was funny, he mentioned, he doesn't think of it in terms of a hard ball, a slow ball. He just thinks of it as a ball. And it made me think of you in your use of the word "the game." So, yeah, I think that was a really interesting point that he made as far as having a nice wide spectrum of hitting styles.
Hingis, she spent time at Saddlebrook, spent time at Nick Bollettieri's, and of course their mother, the coach, Melanie. People have to remember that she won Junior Wimbledon at 12. She used to set her hand, didn't have a great serve.
Was it Wimbledon or the French? I think it was the French.
Was it the French? Okay, fact check.
I think it's 12.
She never. I'm talking about Junior Wimbledon. I think she.
Yeah, I'm talking about Junior French. Yeah, I'm talking about 12.
But actually, here, the first thing on Melanie is made the daughter hit with everybody at the academy, so she could see everybody's swing, not just to feel the ball and how everybody's ball is a little bit different, but to just read the racket. I think that's a good message for parents. Is that she was such a good player, but we wanted her to hit with everybody while she's here. A side note is John Lofny Diaga. For a very brief time, he trained with us when he was a kid. He played mixed with her for 3 years. And, I've told him a few times, I said, why don't you talk to her about her serve? And, you get to a certain point in time where, you don't tell anybody about the serve. My son played and became All-American with a player who had a palm-up serve. And my son would just say to him, Cobra, 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 put the racket in such and such position. Great player, but not a great serve. Speaking about the serve, I want to get this in. We talk about sparring partners. I think this gets people's attention. So I've been in the Orange Bowl many, many times, many, many decades now, going back to when McEnroe played. This doesn't apply to the girls, but the boys. You just walk the courts, and you just know a large percentage of the players, especially the foreign players, they're not thinking about college tennis. And then as you walk the court, you just evaluate their service motions. And there's a very good chance that 5 years later, so all those 18-year-olds are now 23, and they become sparring partners because they're not good enough for pro tennis. And then in that sense, tennis is a fallback. People, a lot of the teenage boys get to that level, so they're obviously a good hitter. That expression, they're a good hitter, and they have a built-in job. It's a survival job. They didn't plan on being a tennis teacher, didn't plan on being a coach, but that's the scenario. What else comes to your mind with sparring partners?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much. I mean, I think we've covered a lot of the different angles. I would say that the one aspect that I have not seen enough when I see, and it could be a situation of, a lot of facilities won't allow a sparring partner to have a basket with them. But even with, if you have 6 balls, the one aspect that I don't see enough of are return to serves. I mean, I would always think that's a great method for a hitting partner to really influence himself, to make a really big impact on a young player, is by working on the return to serve. And they can literally, just get 6 balls, ask the returner to keep hitting the ball right back to them, and then just get lots of reps hitting return to serve. That's really, let's say, unless a coach is well thought out or well structured, I just don't think enough kids hit enough return to serves, and that's definitely something for a young sparring partner. It's an easy way to kind of get in there and make a big jump right away, because most kids don't practice enough serves and they don't practice enough returns.
Yeah, or the way to work on the serve last. Monica Selish's father used to serve about 500 balls. There's about 250 balls in your typical tennis cart. And Braden used to say that no one took the ball earlier, male or female. I would say this about sparring partners. The tennis directors have to be very careful if they offer that as a fee, because then people will want to pay a reduced fee and then still treat it like a tennis lesson. It's always case by case. I do think that the idea of giving no scholarships, I mentioned that earlier, student assistantship, there should be an orientation for young coaches. Bill Tim with the USPTA, voice of the USPTA, he used to do 3-to-1, I think it was, where he would lecture to the USPTA coaches, and I remember being at so many sessions where he was the headliner, and you take one lesson with him, and then you take 3 lessons with a staff member. So it could be packaged, but a tennis director needs to be very careful not to say, well, these are what lessons cost, and these are what hitting lessons cost, and hitting lessons may be half what a lessons cost, because then Joe Public could say, okay, we'll take the reduced lessons and we'll just ask questions, and then it becomes just that, where they're signing up for a lesson that's half the fee and expecting it to be a lesson. Sparring sessions, no talking. Water breaks are not social breaks. I think it's still, good cop versus bad cop is like, let's go to work here. And I think also too is that when you have people go cross court, I think it's important to say this. I rattle this off all the time. Boredom. To be bored is to insult your own intelligence. To be bored is a poor reflection upon yourself. If you're bored, that means you're boring. You got to be excited about, okay, let's see how many balls we can hit over the service line, cross court. And you can do the reverse cross courts as well. So on either side, say for example, if somebody's too close to their body on their backhand, is put yourself in the forehand corner and hit backhands the opposite way. I think also the sparring sessions become a big lesson, realizing that placement is better than power. Play the ball deep. Play the ball like a machine. I've got down.
I'm going to take a different.
Go ahead. Go.
I've got a new angle here for the sparring partner. So we're about an hour away from Carlos Alcaraz playing against Struth in the finals.
Yeah.
And the amount of coaching that I hear coming from Juan Carlos Ferrero, and he was a former number 1 in the world, phenomenal player, but I don't know who's coaching Struth. But the more that they allow this coaching rule to be in effect, and the more they recorded on the sidelines, you've got to imagine that the majority of the lower ranked guys are probably having hitting partners, or the level of information is probably not going to be the same between. So it's kind of interesting to me now that they're really making a push to record these coaching dialogues. How much are they going to show? Are they going to show enough to show that these guys don't know? They're not that creative and they're saying the same mundane things over and over, or are they going to filter it like the NBA, where when the NBA zooms in on a timeout, you're just hearing generic stuff. Play defense, you can do it, rah rah rah. There is an X's and O's that are being showed, because I'm assuming that teams have said do not share that information. But it's going to be kind of interesting now that TV is really making a push to get the coaching box. Ferreira doesn't stop talking. I mean, for those that speak Spanish, they know what he's saying constantly. But kind of interesting to see who Stroop has in his corner and what they might be saying. Well,
I know you speak Spanish. Are you in tune with? Can you pick up what Juan Carlos is saying to Alcaraz?
Yeah. I mean, you can definitely hear Juan Carlos saying, say two to one side, one to the other, or he's going to say, oftentimes it's just very generic stuff to get them moving. No big deal, move on. Be sitting on this serve, or play two here and then go short. But I mean, he is constantly coaching. I mean, it's and I'm one of the outliers, but I'm not a fan of it. I don't like that coaching's been around forever. Me personally, I prefer where you had to be a little bit coy and sneaky to get your coaching tips in versus just all this talking. So, I mean, I get it from a TV perspective that, maybe it's interesting for the person at home, but it kind of seems too much to me anyway. And it could just be that TV is focusing on it too much instead of the coaches doing too much. Maybe this has always been around. I know that I'm in Colombia, Pato Alvarez, who was, Colombian. I mean, he was infamous for literally coaching the entire match and the chair umpire knowing it. And Pato Alvarez moving around the lower bowl and just changing his hat. And his players knew what color hat he had, and he would just walk around and literally micromanage an entire match, saying serve and volley here, serve to the forehand here and stay back, or what have you. So, I'm a little bit like Agassi here that doesn't like the coaching as much and wants the player to be able to figure it out on his own. But I could be in the minority.
No, I like your side of that, where I like to, no coaching, even though they were coaching. But now, it's a little bit too much. Actually, you could send Andy Fitzell an email, text, give him a call. He could tell you what's going on with Struff, because Henry Squire, who I met when he was 6, gone on to become a pretty good player, and he's practiced, I guess I shouldn't say endless hours, but he's practiced too many times to count with Struff. And in fact, he did some work, from what Andy told me, with Struff's coach recently. But Andy, they would share court time. In other words, they would practice. Andy's coaching Henry, and Struff's there with his coach. Years ago at the Orange Bowl, Wojtek Miras, who became a really good tennis player, he's same age as Jimmy Connors, and he wasn't given the chance to travel like feedback. But I can remember, saying, hey, okay, let's go around this place and you're going to translate for me, because he could speak 6 languages. And it's pretty interesting that the myths of tennis are the same in every language. It's just amazing. It's the same thing. Here are a few things on ideas when I just think of sparring. I mentioned Martina Hingis, mother wanting to hit with every ball. Margaret Court, she would come back after being pregnant, and she was continued to play the tour as a mom, and she would say you got to be careful not to walk the plank. Where players, if they just rally too much, they just move side to side. They don't move diagonally into the court. Dennis Vandermeer used to say, as a tennis coach, you want to be good enough with your racket where you can hit various shots. You can intentionally hit short and then arc the ball deep, where the person, you want them to move diagonally. It's kind of like the Spanish extra, where the player would do it off a live ball. And for our listeners, a live ball means it's off the racket. A dead ball means the coach is just feeding the ball out of the basket. So a live ball goes back and forth. But be careful not to go side to side. Lynette Federer, Roger was asked one time, what was your mother's number one tennis rule? And he said that never let a ball bounce twice. I share a story where Jim Klein sent me a video of Federer, said, you're going to love this, and share it with your juniors. And I looked at it, I didn't get it. And I said, what am I going to love? Because, he's just nonchalant, not moving his feet. But anytime the ball was hit stray away from him, he just would sprint. He ran after every ball. So that was built in at a young age. I always tell players, and I think of Jimmy Connors, Medvedev is a player like that, get behind the ball. If you watch Medvedev, when the ball goes out, he's, it's like David Ferrer, they called him the dog, Perro, that just run and run and
run. Come on, Steve, you could do a better job with those double R's.
Yeah, give us that again.
Perro.
So anyway, Medvedev gets behind the ball. Jimmy Connors get behind the ball. Even the ball's going out. I mean, it's a pet peeve of mine. When the ball's going way out, a kid just stands there and they put their finger up. They don't say anything verbally. No presence on the court. Run after every ball, just like a dog. I think this is an amazing story with sparring partners, is the Malevas. And the Malevas, not freaks of nature. Average size, all three sisters at one time, back when they only had 16 seeds. It was 3 times at 3 majors, the 3 sisters, all seeded. And their mother in Bulgaria, she had control of indoor courts and she had control of sparring partners. So court time and just hitting balls. I tell a story about being in Japan and, went to 5 cities and lectured 8 hours in each city. One city, it was 16 hours. And then I'm riding in the car with Kazuko Swamatsu's father. And then we go to the Japanese Tennis Center, and there's a pro event going on, and he could speak a little English. I could not speak a little Japanese. So he just looks at me, he goes, famous face. Everybody knew him. So I said, well, and he said this in English, he didn't have to use a translator. I said, how do you become really good in tennis? Because his granddaughter was very good as well, top 50 in the world. And basics, repeat. But he did the coaching and he had sparring partners. I've got my notes. I mentioned Vilas hitting against 2 girls and it was hitting into the wind. Bjorn Borg's first wife, she was ranked very high in the world. I think she was 36, 37 in the world. Romanian, Mariana Simonescu. And it was amazing. Borg would be at Boca West, and he would hit for hours just up the middle of the court. Just hour after hour, and not hitting that big a ball, but just over and over again. And the swing patterns are the same. Then you just have to change gears. I remember seeing the same thing
at the Miami Open when it used to be the Lipton, I guess, with Leighton Hewitt and Kim Clijsters when they were dating. They would just literally hit up the middle for a good hour and a half.
Yeah. With I've mentioned before, Harold Solomon visited. We did some video work for his grandson, and so his father, is just a club player, according to Harold, and so, but he's a sparring partner. A sparring partner is somebody you're hitting with. Doesn't have to be someone who's a world-class player. And 3 times a week, they'd hit 1,000 balls in a row, and as they got to 999, they had to start again. And for our listeners, I mean, Harold's a small guy, number 5, number 6 in the world. I mean, great tennis player. You mentioned Leighton Hewitt. The term shag balls means that you're going to, as you know, you're just going to be on the side of the court. You feed the ball in. The players hitting never stop. They never stop. They just hit. And at a pro tournament, many times you're just going to get a court for 30 minutes. They're going to give you 2 cans of balls. They use 1 can for the first 15 minutes. In the next 15 minutes, the second can of balls. And Hewitt, it doesn't have to be a tennis player. It could have been his physical trainer. But he would have 2 people shagging balls. And he would come out and he would just outwork everybody there. And, I remember Ryan Ginley, a coach who, I thought years and years ago, a basketball guy, did a very good job with intensity, telling a bunch of kids, hey, you might not be able to be a Sampras or a Federer. And it was at the time when Sampras was, close to retiring and Federer was coming up. So the kids basically knew these guys. And he said, but you can be a Leighton Hewitt. You can go out and just work and just move and fight. I have my notes, and again, you brought that up with Austin Krajicek. You miss the ball, you're out. We do all sorts of things to try to get people to keep the ball in play. When they're rallying, okay, if you miss, you and your partner have to switch sides. You have to jog to the other side, jog backwards. Or if you miss short, and then you get their attention. It's really interesting when you have players play a ground game and you put something on the line, and it's just a depth game. And then they start to have more shape and they start to have some arc over the net. This is a line that Joe Dicer, a senior player, used to say. It was at Holiday Park at first. He used to practice there, which is now, as you know, in your neighborhood. It's called the Jimmy Everett Tennis Center. A lot of players migrated over to at the time it was new, the Tennis Club of Fort Lauderdale. It was way back to the 70s. But what Joe Dicer would say, there's 20 people on any given day that can beat you 20 different ways. I do think that tennis becomes cliquey, and a lot of times people they're just practicing with the same group of players, and they don't see that many tennis balls, different type tennis balls.
Here, let me backtrack. I wanted to add something to your
go ahead.
Margaret Court comment about the dangers of going along the plank. We mentioned earlier Pato Alvarez. I used to watch him when I used to go to Spain in the summer. And, he must have been, he died a couple of years ago. He was close to 90. So he must have been in his late 60s, working with a group of probably like about 6 guys that were top 300 in the world or so. And he would start every practice with each of them where he's at net and they're hitting the ball back to him. And he would just volley it deep, volley it short, volley it deep, volley it short. He'd be doing it with the thumb. It's so funny watching him. He would hold the thumb on the grip, volleying. And it did not matter how hard they hit it. He would not miss one volley. If it was in his zone, he made it in. It was just, the same basic idea as far as, the Vilas and the Brad Gilbert Agassi 100. The same concept here. He was trying to do 50. Or it could have been 20, but whatever it was a lot. And it was a lot harder than it sounds because he was moving them everywhere. And they were hitting it hard. He would just not miss a ball. But, it would prevent that plank hitting that you were discussing.
No, that's a good point. Thanks. With the Spanish drill where you toss the ball into the court, they move diagonally in. They would go back to home base, recover to the baseline, and then you toss the ball and they move back diagonally. But, yeah, for our listeners, you can do that with a live ball. You can have younger players that are new to the game, not beginners by any means, but one player comes in and they just touch the ball for the volley and they have to move back and the ball bounces and they just brush the ball. So you have one player moving up and moving back. But with that, when a player moves backwards, to add to what you're saying, is it's a great way for them to have a short backswing. You won't find players running backwards and having a huge backswing. My amateur effort with, and I appreciate you as a professional helping us with these podcasts. Rocky quotes. I did have a bunch of Rocky quotes for one podcast, and we never got to them. But
you had your one chance and you failed.
Well, I'm throwing this in. I'm throwing this in though. Is that a Rocky quote? I'll be a good sparring partner. I'll take no cheap shots. So some other things on a sparring partner. If there is no net, if you swing efficiently, there is no net. You can alternate your feet. Somebody can hit a controlled ball to you. Okay, hit open stance, hit close stance. We've already mentioned alternate spin is worth mentioning again. When you miss, say sorry. I apologize. We're wasting time. I missed. No one stops when there's an error. Okay, so say your hitting partner, sparring partner, they miss. You don't just stand there while they go to pick a tennis ball up. You're doing the shadow movement. You're still taking swings. You just don't stop. Braden used to call it your frustration tolerance level. How many balls can you keep in play? Just how many balls can you keep in play? But I do think there's a frustration. I think there's a frustration tolerance level too. It's really interesting. Like kids that are really good at the baseline, they're gonna practice at the baseline. A kid who's not very good at the baseline, they're gonna go to the net right away. They'd like to be practicing where they're good. I think with parents, we always say as far as feeding balls. So obviously that's not sparring, feeding tennis balls. But if you can feed breadcrumbs to a pigeon, but deal with where to hit the ball. So we do a drill called setter hitter. And then we have the setter count. And we have the setter just use a linear racket pattern. We call it tabletop, like a volley with an added follow through. And they just set the ball. They just are, I don't really like the word push, but they're hitting the ball back. They're not hitting with topspin. And then how many out of 20 going cross court, and you can do the reverse cross court, so you can do down the line. But how many out of 20 can they hit up over the service line? And it's very important to say up over the service line. It's a lifting game. And so the setter is counting 1 for 1, 1 for 2, 1 for 3. And how many can they get out of 20? And then to put skip ropes down. And I think that's one great thing about the 10 and under line is it's 9 feet from the baseline. And that's, if you're hitting the ball up over that 9-foot line, where the 10 and under line is. So you can just if it's a clay court, you can just draw a line. I think it's so important, again, not for just for sparring, but you got to teach kids to feed balls. Now, another thing that we have kids do right away, and they're not very good at it at first, is to do a double hit with, again, imagination's greater than knowledge. You can have one kid at the net, and the other player is at the service line, and they're doing it. The person at the service line is doing a double hit off the ground, but the volleyer has to hit and hold the racket head, that body balance position, the isometrics, hold themselves in that controlled position. I think the better the player, I think I've always said this about Roger Federer, he made full court tennis look like mini tennis. It's on our course, Tennis Intelligence Applied, 5 different versions of mini tennis. One where you play service line to service line, one serve, stay back, golden rule, cannot hit the ball hard, one serve, you have to have a complete service motion, has to look like tennis. Mini tennis 2, where you have 2 service boxes, but you can come to the net. Mini tennis 3, this is one that the pros used to use. The pros would do this years ago at the end of practice, end of the day, and they would do it for dinner. And they would play serve and volley in one service box. Now, we had different variables to each one, but Mini Tennis 3, that the serve and volleyer has to come in. We can do it where the returner comes in. And Mini Tennis 4, we don't do that as much, but that's one of the most popular among the pros, is you hit down like you're playing ping pong. Mini Tennis 5 is a double hit. We do Mini Tennis 5 with a California twist, where the third time you're going to hit an emergency shot. And the boys, teenage boys, love to hit the tweener. I think with the sparring partner, and you mentioned you started off as a sparring partner, volley. You know, it's very interesting that young upcoming tournament players, they really can't feed the courtesy lob like you're asked to do in a warm-up. And, you know, anything that's practiced can be improved. And being able to hit lobs off your racket while the other person is just hitting overheads. It really, in the end, it's control. And it's amazing how many young players, they've put so much time into tennis, but because they're just banging balls from the baseline, they don't have the ability to, like say, for example, if one player's at the baseline, hit your opponent a ground stroke. I should say, you're at the baseline, you hit a ground stroke, and your hitting partner hits a volley, and then comes back to you, and you throw up a lob. So it's just really a high-low drill. And then, you know, how long can you practice, or how long can you keep the ball in play, high-low? So it's alternating overhead volley. And how long can you just keep that one ball in play? You know, I think also coming back to where, you know, we said, okay, if the parents are to feed balls, where does the shot go? Can you get 10 for 10 in out of the quadrant or into the quadrant? With the target tennis. But also, too, say, for example, one player's up at the net hitting volleys, and they stay up at the net hitting volleys until they hit a volley short. If they miss wide, longer in the net, they miss, or they should say they miss, but they rotate back. So if you have two players up at the net hitting volleys, and one of them hits a short volley, they both jog backwards. And then you do the same thing off the courtesy lob. You both get to stay up there until one of you misses an overhead. So control, consistency. Any other comments, questions, thoughts, concerns?
No, I think we covered a lot. I think it's going to be hopefully useful for young parents and players as they go on, because I think it's double-sided. It's got to be the hitting partner can be better, but then the parent that's probably overseeing the practice can also be better. So I think it's just not one-sided here.
Yeah. I just have a few more things in my notes, just to say it a second, third time, is players need to be upset. They can be controlled, they get the sportsmanship award, but when they hit short in practice, they like, wait a minute, you're hitting short. You can add consequences to that. I think also, too, is that when you mention sparring partners, it's very important to do doubles. Okay, spin your serve in, come in 1, 2, 3, volley, Peter Burwash. Serve, come in, and Peter would have people hit a double hit on the volley. You know, you come in and you got to be careful because it can really influence someone to use a really strong continental grip. But you serve, you come in, you volley, and you double hit the volley, you stop it on your forehand, hit your backhand, or vice versa. But also, again, doubles. One thing we haven't really mentioned is the figure eight. That's a drill that I think is, I like your phrase, being ushered away. You hit down the line, I hit cross court, and let's just keep the ball going. You know, someone mentioned someone like a Harold Solomon. Is that players like that could get to the point where they do that for a half an hour without missing, and it's just running, hitting the ball, and moving, corner to corner. I do think it can be competitive and non-competitive. Let me say that correctly. Non-competitive to competitive. Non-competitive to competitive. It just baffles me. You tell some juniors, okay, rally the ball 4 times and play the point out, and they can do it. Rally the ball 6 times and play the point out, they can do it. Rally the ball 8 times and play the point out, they can do it. And then when they play, they can't rally. Again, it just comes down to anxiety. I think predictable, where you go, say you're going cross court, and cross court to cross court, deep, and then once one ball lands short, that the person automatically attacks. And you do all sorts of combinations like that. So that's really an offensive, defensive drill. Vandermeer used to always say, if you work on basic shots, grow into specialty shots, and then you always have to work on emergency shots as well. If a sparring partner has the control to do this, hit a drop shot, the kid comes in, and then they let the lob go over their head, and they practice retrieving the lob. I think it's very important that the sparring partner has a skill level, but also has a knowledge base that they can create the situations that take place in a match. What do you got in the background there?
Yeah, I guess it's, what time is it here? 10:30 or, I don't know, they have the bells. I'm trying to figure out where it's coming from myself.
Well, I do think with sparring, there's a build-up on the mental side, the marathon minutes. Put those minutes in doing the same boring shot. I talked a little bit about boredom. That's a Bradenism. Learn to hit the same boring shot. Tennis health is being able to hit more balls. Again, the rich get richer, poor get poorer. Keep the ball in play. The physical side is constantly be moving your feet, happy feet. Then aerobic, anaerobic, your lungs become as big as trash cans. Before I sign off, I've got to tell a Colombian story or two. You got a Colombian story or two? What comes to your mind? You think of tennis in Colombia. You must have a million stories.
Tennis in Colombia, no. The only one that I've got is when I used to come here as a kid, and even as an adult, doubles was not played at all. And recently we had the number one doubles team in the world with Farah and Kawal. So it's interesting. I'm curious to see if in South America, if doubles picks up a little bit more in popularity when you go to the clubs and see if people play it more. What I can assure you, Steve, is that I will be very shocked if I see pickleball in South America. They will play paddle and other sports, I think, before they play pickleball. But I could be wrong. We always have to throw in a pickleball reference here on every podcast nowadays. So
which one of
that is my.
Well, that's good news, perhaps. Although what I'm saying about pickleball is you can't beat them, join them. What we need to do in tennis, we've made all sorts of mistakes. If we had done a better job, pickleball wouldn't be booming like it is. But, the best pickleball players are tennis players. And I think it's a mistake. As I said, Sam Querrey said, tennis players got 90% of this game down, but there's definitely 10% to learn, all the nuances and such. And, all these so-called overnight instant pickleball experts from tennis. So we get,
So what was your Colombian?
Well, let me ask a question. I could give you a Colombian story, but which of those Colombian players went to USC?
Farah.
Yeah, I understand that when he went, I heard he wasn't such a great volleyer, but Jeff Kosier, who lived with us when he was a kid, from South Africa, trained with us, and then he ended up spending a lot of time with Craig Tiley. Then Jeff, he ended up, the family, he spent some time with the extended tennis family, spent time with Raven Klaassen. But yeah, Jeff's been their coach for a long time. And, he was there to help them become number one.
I used to run the concession at Dante Purcell Park, and his sister, Romy, used to play at UM, was also a very good player. And I remember he worked for me for a few weeks in the summer before heading off to USC that freshman year. So, a great guy. It was awesome to see the guys have this level of success because, I'm sure a lot of people didn't expect it.
Laura Hanna is from Tyler, Texas, and I spent a lot of time helping with her game. She played at Texas A&M, and I remember taking her to Europe with Liliana Fernandez. She played at A&M with Laura, and she ended up playing Fed Cup. But here's a story to end off. Ruben Perchek. So at the time, Tracy Austin, she was a teenager. She was one of the best players in the world, but she was dating a guy by the name of Matt Anger, who recently retired. He was a longtime coach at University of Washington. So Ruben from Cali, he goes to Wimbledon, and he plays Matt. He comes back and says, well, he felt like his swings were too big, and that's when the grass was different than it is now. So Kim Wittenberg had introduced me to Ruben. He was playing at UC Irvine. So Kim brought him up to Costa de Casa, and I started working with him. So he ended up spending an entire summer at Costa de Casa with his mom. And so between Wimbledon and the U.S. Open, and I said, hey, Vic, I got this kid. He's living here now with his mother. And I'm training him every day after the program for a few hours. And, I was training him in the morning. I mean, they're living right at Costa de Casa. And Vic used to walk his dogs every night. And he stopped, and, his wife goes, where did Vic go? So he would be out there, for almost the entire practice session, night after night. So he's going to the U.S. Open. So I'm going to the U.S. Open. Vic's going to the U.S. Open. And he's only 18, still playing juniors. And he was not signed up by the Colombian Tennis Federation because he didn't train with the Colombian Tennis Federation in the summer. He trained at the Vic Braden Tennis College. So he was not entered in the U.S. Open. So tennis politics are everywhere. But he ended up a year later. I know it wasn't a large publication, but Columbia had its own magazine, and he was on the cover, and he played Davis Cup. But the pro tennis wasn't for him. I remember him, playing and watching him lose to Martin Heite in 3 sets, and Andrik Sundstrom in 3 sets. And I mean, he hit the ball so well. And I remember Vic showing his strokes at the National Teachers Conference. It was the same time that Chevy Chase was there. So it was Vic was showing Chevy Chase's strokes and Ruben Perchek's strokes. And so he didn't get to play the U.S. Open. But pro tennis wasn't for him. And I mean, at one point he was on the medical staff at Stanford, but that's two players I worked with 100 years ago, but one played, and I did very little work with Liliana Fernandez, but enough where, I went to Europe with her, and but then Ruben, he just transformed. He changed his game, and he's hitting the ball so well, but he didn't stay out there very long. I would guess less than a year and a half max, and then went to school forever and became a medical expert, holistic medicine. But Colombian tennis, with a lot to be said about Colombians. It's amazing how many people I've met from Colombia over the years. Tennis is.
Now you've got a young girl now or a young woman now that's doing well, Maria Camila Osorio.
Yeah, I mean, so, she won the French, right? French juniors. Could
be. I'm not sure.
There was a girl from Colombia who won the French juniors. You have to check it out, fact check her, and
I can do it now.
On the phone. That's the skill I don't have. So anyway, she if it's the same gal, she was training at the USTA National Tennis Center, and a couple of our boys went over, and teenage boys. I remember 2 of them going 3 sets with her. And come on, guys, but they wouldn't go to the net. We, 2 guys that we trained forever, and I don't want to mention their names, Rush Ganji and Tal Goodman. They wouldn't go to the net. I love when you do that. They wouldn't go to the net. I go, boys. I remember Andy Fitzell being over there with one of them, and goes, yeah, it was a good day. It took an hour and 12 minutes for our player to go to the net. Anyway,
she won the U.S. Open Juniors, French Open Juniors.
Yeah, so that's pretty impressive. So that's who it was. She had won a Grand Slam title. So sparring partners with knowledge, without knowledge. A sparring partner in boxing, they wear a helmet and a mouth guard. The sparring partner in tennis, they have a role, but they should not have a speaking part unless they have something to say. But I appreciate you doing this. You're not at the table across from me, but it was your idea to put up the Vic Braden chair, so I appreciate that.
I can't kick you, so it's
Yeah.
But it's I'm glad this worked out well.
No, thanks. And I do think that we've
I was
had.
missing our weekly meetup.
I do think that the people that have contacted me via email and or other means, they've let me know, hey, you should go back and do some topics or review the forehand, review the backhand. But again, thanks for doing this, Andres. I appreciate it.
All right, Steve.
All the best to you and your family down there. All right, bye.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a great day. All right, podcast 144, or a dozen. That's a lot of podcasts. I hope that people got something out of this. Appreciate Andres taking the time. But Kentucky Derby. What does Andy Roddick, great interview, what's he say about NASCAR? It's 4 hours ago and left. Anyway, the Kentucky Derby and now sparring. That's what we covered in this podcast. Thanks. Adios, amigos.